Can I see a thumbs up? Can people hear me? Yes, good. I'm sorry if I repeat anything that was said, but I couldn't hear anything. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my background and why I think I'm capable of giving this talk. Um, Way back when I went to college, I was very interested in one topic, and that topic was the evolution of intelligence. I was really interested in why human beings ended up being so much more intelligent than other animals. And so I studied it as an undergrad, I studied it as a grad student, and I'm pushing 68. So it's fair to say that I've been studying this topic for 50 years. I mean, this is probably the thing I know best. And so it's really a pleasure for me to be able to talk about what does it mean when you call something or someone a bird brain. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I'm going to get rid of that because I find myself distracting. Okay, so who are you calling a bird brain? The way I've arranged this talk is that you have to indulge me. I'm going to start a little bit by literally talking about brains, why bird brains are different than mammal brains. And then we're going to talk about intelligence and behavior and compare birds' ability to solve various kinds of problems with mammals' ability to solve various types of problems. But as I'm sure you all know, it's always hard to get the first slide to go. Hold on. Now, why? Down? What's going to work? There we go. Okay. You know, as I'm sure most of you know, if you call someone a bird brain, it's a really big insult. And so I wanted to talk about why that's the case, why we've always assumed that birds are really, to be blunt, stupid. And I think the answer really lies in the fact that we tend to be anthropocentric. In order to be intelligent, we assume that an animal has to be a lot like us. And so what I'm going to do to start this talk off is tell you what I was taught 50 years ago when I went to college about why we know that birds are so much stupider than mammals. So this is what I learned when I was an undergraduate. Okay, first off, birds' heads are simply too small to have a good brain. I mean, think about something like a little passerine. You know, there just isn't enough space in there, I was told, to have enough neurons to be intelligent. So some of it is just that their brains are too small. And that's true even if you look at really large birds like this golden eagle. I mean, if you look at the size of its head compared to a man's head, and that's a really big bird, you can still see how much smaller its brain is going to be compared to a human's. And it's even worse than appearances seem, because unlike mammals, where your brains really pretty much totally fill out your skull, birds' brains are much smaller than their skulls. So their skulls aren't very big, and their brains are even smaller yet. The main reason for this is because birds have much larger eyes than mammals do. Their eyes simply invade the space that, you know, we would have brain here. This is the back of these owlets' eyes. Human eyes take up about 1% of the size of our cranium. In birds, it can go up to 12%. I think the birds that eyes take up the most space are starlings, if I remember correctly. It's about 12%. If our eyes were the same size as a bird's eyes, they'd be the size of large navel oranges. And you can imagine, you know, how much space that would take away from us having a good brain, big brain. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but this is a bald eagle skull, and you can see how big these eyes would be if they were in there. So the whole brain is just this little piece right here. That's the only part of their skull that has a brain in it. So their brains are just small. Besides that, the instinct part of their brain is relatively large compared to mammals. So again, the thinking part is relatively smaller yet. And that's because birds, this is a diagram of goose brain, birds, because they fly, they need to be very coordinated, which is controlled by a part of the brain called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is very enlarged. And so the thinking part of the brain is only 50% of the size of the brain, as small as that size is. Whereas if you look at a dog, all this pale yellow here is all thinking part. And you can see it's most of the brain. And then, if that weren't enough, the real killer is that if you look at a bird brain versus a human brain, you can see that it's totally smooth. It's totally smooth, whereas a human brain, looks like cauliflower. The surface of the brain, the surface area is so large that you've got to just squish it to get it in there, so you get all these folds. The reason it matters that their brains are so smooth is that if you look just among mammals now, the smoother the brain, the dumber the mammal. So, chimps don't have as many convolutions as humans. Cats have fewer yet. Rats' brains are relatively smooth. So by analogy, now you've got this totally smooth brain. It must not work very well. So that's what I was taught when I was an undergraduate, and even as a graduate student. They just don't have the brain power to be smart. But let's move to a more modern perspective. This is a CAT scan of a woodpecker of some sort. I don't remember the species. And the thing you have to keep in mind is that the leitmotif of bird evolution, unlike mammal evolution, was to get small and to lose weight, to get light. Because birds, more than anything, are creatures that evolved to fly, even though some don't fly. They evolved to fly. And in order to fly, you want to shed as much weight as you can. And so their brains evolved totally differently with a totally different set of evolutionary pressures on them. Basically, you want to save weight. And the way you save weight, I'm getting ahead of myself, is you make each of your computers, each cell in the brain that's a little computer, you make them smaller. And we'll talk more about that. Okay, first off, I also wanted to say that birds' brains may be small, but so are their bodies. And in fact, if you look at the size of their brain in relation to their body size, they don't look so bad. In fact, they've got a higher brain to body size ratio than mammals do. So that's another way you can look at it that we didn't used to. In fact, hummingbirds have the highest highest ratio of any vertebrate brain to body weight. Okay. Also, we now know that the smoothness of their brains is totally irrelevant because it's a completely different structure. Human beings have a cerebral cortex. That's what you see that's all cauliflower-like. But birds don't have a cerebral cortex. What they have is a pallium. They've got a hyperpallium and a mesopallium and a nidopallium, but it's a pallium. It's an entirely different structure. It's arrived from different embryological tissues, and there's no reason it should look like a cerebrum. I think I skipped something. Something skip? Something skipped. Okay. All right, maybe that'll be later. Okay, let me talk a little bit about the mammalian neocortex and why it's so different than a palladium. Our brains, all mammals' brains, the outer layer of the brain, the cerebral cortex, is 6 layers thick. You can't change that. So even if you want to get smarter, we don't add a layer. We don't have more layers than mice do. So as our brains get bigger, what happens is that each of these layers gets physically larger, which means the cells spread out more and more and more. Let me give you an analogy. I think that's really simple. Imagine I had 2 PCs and I hook them together. And if I hook them together and now I have two PCs that are connected to each other, they're smarter. They've got more computing power than either of those PCs did separately. Okay, now let's imagine that when I hook them together on a 3-foot wire. Okay, there's a 3-foot cord between them. What would happen if I made that cord 30 feet instead of 3 feet? Would there be any more computing power? No, of course not. The computing power has to do with the processors that you have. In the case of brains, that means cell bodies. The length of the wires doesn't make you any smarter at all. What I'm really trying to say is that our brains are so big, but a lot of the space is taken up with these really long wires. Birds' brains are more efficient than our brains. They're arranged in a different way. So it's not that they have fewer PCs hooked together. It's that they're tethered together on 6-inch wires rather than 20-feet wires. And that's really the difference. Let me show you a little bit about this. This is called a pyramidal cell. It's a very typical mammalian brain cell, and you can see it's a really large cell. These actually are very large cells, but the computer itself is right here, just this little thing right here. All of these are wires connecting the cell to other cells. Now, having a lot of connections with other cells is really, really, really good. But again, what if the connection were only this long rather than being this long? That doesn't make us smarter. So our brains are packed with cells that take up a real lot of space. Again, here's just a diagram of that. If you look at a mammal brain, you've got cell bodies, but they're really pretty far apart. If you look at a bird brain, they're arranged differently. And so the cell bodies that need to talk to each other are much closer together. So finally, just kind of wrapping this up, mammal brains are bigger, you can see that, but the neurons are much more densely packed in a bird brain. And in fact, what it turns out is that if you actually kind of see what the thinking part of the brains are made of, birds actually have more processing power per cubic inch than mammals do. So that's, in fact, so for example, a parrot has about as much processing power as a good-sized monkey. And of course, monkeys are very smart mammals. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say about brains. And so, yes, bird brains are very different, but that doesn't necessarily mean bad or inferior. So with that aside, now this is the slide I thought I'd missed. So the old view, this is what I was originally taught. The green is good, the purple isn't too worthwhile for thinking. You can see is that mammals had a real lot of green and birds had just this tiny little bit amount of green. But now the modern view is understanding that our understanding of mammal brains haven't changed. But if you look at the bird brains, you can see that we now know that a lot more of the space is devoted to thinking and problem solving than we had previously believed. So there we go. All right, now we can get away from the brain and start talking about behavior. Well, I was a psych professor for more than 35 years. So I can tell you that there's no one accepted uniform definition of intelligence. But here are the kinds of things people talk about when they talk about intelligence. So if you're intelligent, you can acquire and apply knowledge and skills. In other words, you can learn. You can adapt to deal with new situations. In other words, your behavior is flexible. You can change it and modify it to deal with, a new situation rather than always doing the same behavior over and over again. And then kind of more generally, it means you can reason, you can plan, you can solve problems, you can think abstractly, you can comprehend ideas, and you can use insight. So that's what psychologists really for the past 100 years have meant when they talk about, are we intelligent? Is an animal intelligent? Well, if that's what intelligence is, how do you know if an animal is intelligent? Well, way before anybody was seriously interested in studying birds, they were studying other mammals like apes and monkeys and dogs and cats, and whales. Here are the things they looked at, okay? So this is what we looked at. We looked at, does the animal use tools? Does it play? Can you show that it understands abstract concepts? If that's a term that isn't familiar to you, I'll get to it. Do they have good memory? Are they good at problem solving? I never liked this next one. I never thought it belonged in there, but it's a classic piece, is can they recognize themselves as an individual? Can they make causal inferences? Can they figure out that if I do X, then Y will happen? And can they anticipate others' future behaviors? This was, like I said, for 100 years, psychologists have been looking at this in mammals, more recently in birds, but I can tell you that birds can do all of these things. So every single thing we look at to say, is an animal intelligent, there are some birds that do them. And so now we're going to go through those kind of one-on-one, one by one. So let's start with tool use. There are different types of tool use. That's a Hawaiian crow pictured there. Some tool use is definitely genetic or instinctive. We know that because if you take a bird or mammal and you raise it in isolation all by itself, you'll still see it use tools. So that's just in its genome. Some use of tools is individually learned. The animal or the bird figures it out by trial and learning all by itself. And then the most advanced kind of learning and tool use is when you learn it by social learning. You watch somebody else do it, and then you copy that behavior. And birds do, they're examples of birds that genetic, individually learned, and socially learned. In fact, well over 100 species of birds have been shown to use tools. That's way more than mammals, way more than mammals. And they use it in a real variety of ways. Birds use tools to acquire food, like this Hawaiian crow. Others use it to like keep their bodies groomed. Some animals use tools, some birds use tools for defense, and others use tools to help court and attract a mate. So birds are really good tool users. As a group, they're better tool users than mammals are. Let me give you some of my favorite examples. Oops, hold on. My papers are falling. Okay. Drumming. This is a palm cockatoo, and they're an example of a bird that uses a tool to attract a mate. Because what they do is they find a long stick, and then they cut it down to size, and they strip it of its bark and branches, and they bang on hollow trees with it. Think about like a northern flicker, banging on a hollow tree to announce its territory to attract a mate. That's exactly what palm cockatoos do, but they make a tool in order to do that. Probably my very favorite example of bird tool use is called fish baiting. And fish baiting is found in a fair number of species, including gulls, herons, kingfishers, kites. So again, it's a fairly widespread behavior. Fish baiting is when you take a food item, for example, a worm, and instead of eating it yourself, even though you eat worms, you walk over to a stream, you drop it in the water, you wait for a fish to come, and then you catch the fish. And the reason that's so impressive to me is it shows that birds have some level of self-control. I mean, they don't, you give them a worm and they eat worms, they don't eat it. They delay gratification, if you will. They wait and intelligently use it as a lure to get an even better food item. So that's a very nice use of tools that we see. Yet another, and thanks to Alfred Hitchcock, I couldn't avoid doing this. There are some birds that use tools as weapons, and they're all corvids. Okay, they're all corvids in that family. They use, they're different corvids do different things. So fish crows and ravens drop dry grass on gulls that are nesting, trying to chase them away so that they can get to the gulls' eggs. Sometimes they pick up a pine cone and throw it at another bird, something like that. Probably the nicest example I know, because it took place right here in the Pacific Northwest, this observation was a stellar jay was being attacked by a crow. And so it picked up a stick, because of course crows are bigger than stellar jays. It picked up a stick so it could poke the crow while keeping away from the crow's beak. And so that, like a lance, like if you were a knight in shining armor. So that's another example. Preening tools, as I said, this is a horned puffin. I have a little video of this. It's not the clearest video in the world, but you'll get the idea. They use it to groom. If you can't reach where your itch is.
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can just get a different view. The problem is the video. I'm going to say this, see if I can get rid of all this. It's not letting me do this in presenter view now, but hopefully that'll work well enough. When you take anting is when you take a bug, like an ant or a caterpillar that has some sort of like toxin or acid in its bite, and you rub it all over your body to chase off parasites. So yeah, just another example. And actually, a lot of North American birds do this too. Blue jays do it, red-winged blackbirds do it, cardinals do it, dippers do it, song sparrows do it, robins do it. So, you know, it's a pretty widespread behavior. So let's see now if it's going to work. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Boy, this is just not working well. I don't know why. Oh, there we go. Okay. I'm going to show you a video of a crow doing sequential tool use where they have to do a series of things with tools to show that they can do that.
All right, can I stay in here?
Absolutely, you can sit and watch.
Right.
We'll see what happens.
I would have skipped ahead, but I
Your
can't.
mastermind, because it's going to need that.
Alex studies wild birds, which he releases after 3 months of research. This one is nicknamed 007, and it's about to attempt what Alex believes is one of the most complex tests of the animal mind ever constructed. The bird is familiar with the individual objects, but this is the first time he's seen them.
Uh-oh. I shouldn't have screwed around with it. Yeah.
All right, can I stay in here?
Absolutely, you can sit
I
and
am
watch.
so sorry.
Come on then. Send in your mastermind.
I'm not going to screw around with it
You're gonna
anymore.
need that.
Alex studies wild birds, which he releases after 3 months of research. This one is nicknamed 007, and it's about to attempt what Alex believes is one of the most complex tests of the animal mind ever constructed. The bird is familiar with the individual objects, but this is the first time he's seen them arranged like this. 8 separate stages that must be completed in a specific order if the puzzle is to be solved. And if the bird succeeds, it'll be a world first. He takes time to have a look and then starts with the short stick. Stage 1. He finds it's too short to reach the food. He then sets off to get the first stone. But he drops it. And another. He seems to be stuck. But then something seems to click. He deploys the first stone. And then another. The 8th and final stage. Success. 8 individual stages of one complex puzzle completed.
Okay. Let me tell you, I used to work with language trained chimps. That was what my dissertation was on. Oops, we're going the wrong way. And if a chimp could do that, we would have been unbelievably impressed. Chaining 8 separate behaviors together. I mean, think about your dog or your cat. They might be able to figure out to do one thing, but they wouldn't be able to plan far enough in advance to go from one behavior to another behavior to another behavior 8 times before they get their reward. So anyway, tool use. Second thing that's been really well studied is play behavior. And in mammals, there's definitely a very strong positive correlation between how much you play and how smart you are. Corvids and parrots are the birds that play the most, though sometimes you see it in seabirds and raptors as well. And there's different kinds of play that they can do. There's object play, where they just, play with something, manipulating things for no reason. Birds that cache food pretend to cache things. They cache inedible things like stones. Flight play is when they do loop-de-loops and aerial flight displays for no reason. Bath play is like little kids in a bathtub. They splash way more than they need to. Some birds slide down inclines, some hang upside down even though they're not eating, and some of them just make nonsense sounds like a little child babbles. So if you look at all the play that animals, including birds, do, you can divide it into solo play, which are things they do by themselves, object play, where they're using some object, kind of like a tool, or social play, where they're playing with each other. And generally, the more intelligent you are, the more social play you do. But let me give you some examples of, and I hope this works, just some solo play, for example, because I think it's cute. There are millions of, if you get on YouTube, there are millions of these. Many birds like music and they like to dance. Oops. You get the idea. No one taught the bird to do that. You don't have to teach birds to do that. They like a good beat. Here's another example of play. In this one, what you're seeing is a Russian crow take some sort of lid, some sort of flat circular piece of plastic, I think, and just keep sliding down the roof with it. And they'll do that over and over and over again, for a long time. Oops, come on. Keep going. I won't show you this one to save some time, but I've actually seen this. These are black swans in Australia, and they often like to go surfing. And what they do is they swim out to where the breakers are, and they ride the wave in, and then they fly back out and do it over and over and over again. I've seen them do it for upwards of half an hour at a time, and they're not getting any direct benefit out of it. They just look like they're enjoying themselves. So that's sort of social play, but not very interactive. Whoops, no, I was going to pass that. Here we go. For true social play, you can turn to these birds. These are also Australian birds. These are apostle birds. And they basically play a game called Chase the Guy with the Stick. It's sort of like tag. One of the birds will pick up a stick and everybody else will chase him. And whoever gets to the bird first takes the stick, and then they're the next it. And so they play they play tag just like little kids do, and they switch who has the stick. So you can see a lot of play behavior. Play behavior is important enough to birds that at least one species of bird has a call that induces other birds to play with it. This is a bird we're going to keep coming back to.
Biologist Raoul Schwing is conducting a series of experiments. A job that comes with its hazards.
Kia are extraordinarily playful. In fact, as far as we can tell, they're the most playful bird species on the planet. Whereas most animals play when they're juveniles, Kia play far into adulthood, both on their own, but also socially.
Like most of us, animals only play when they're in the mood. Something that can be encouraged in Kias by giving them new objects or toys to play with. While Kias do sometimes play alone, Raoul's noticed how the playful mood of one can spread throughout the group. So he's setting up an experiment to test why their play appears to be contagious. Kias have excellent vision. They're attracted to vibrant colors, which stimulate a highly playful response in the group. That means using their beak to break things. But after some initial games, the novelty soon wears off, and the group's playful state comes to an end. Raoul thinks he's discovered a way to reignite their playfulness. He believes that Kias encourage each other to join in by using a particular play call.
As you can hear, the Kia are highly vocal creatures. One of their calls is only associated with play behavior, the so-called play call. It sounds a little bit like this.
Raoul thinks the sound of the play call alone has the power to change the mood of any Kia that hears it, causing them to instantly become more playful. He has recorded this call and is about to play it to the group for the very first time. At the moment, all is quiet, and the birds no longer seem interested in the toys. Will simply hearing the call make them want to play again? The response is immediate. The group bursts back into life. Those that hear it play with whomever or whatever they come across.
What we saw here, together with evidence from previous experiments in the wild, strongly suggest that those birds that hear the play call are put into a playful mood.
Okay. So, again, if they've got a unique call that makes each other play, that shows that not only that they do play, they play socially, but that play is very, very important to them, or else such a call would never have evolved. And they probably get the same benefit from it that mammals do, which is it forms bonds between different members of the group. And it also lets them practice doing behaviors that are adaptive to them, that are useful to them. Anyway, social play is considered the most advanced form of play in both mammals and birds, and the ones that do it have the largest brains. Okay, abstract concepts. Abstract concept would be something like flower, because flowers don't all, we all know what a flower is, but they don't share necessarily, they're not the same color, they're not the same shape, they're not the same size. They're a category of things. Or clothing. You can have hats, you can have shoes, you can have coats. So that's an abstract concept. And there's been just tons and tons and tons of research since the 1990s showing that birds can understand abstract concepts. But by far, my favorite researcher who does this is a Japanese professor called Watanabe. And Watanabe basically showed that pigeons could learn to tell the difference between a Picasso and a Monet. This is one of his early studies. I mean, the way you do this is you show them a picture of a Picasso and you reward them for it. And then you show them a picture of Monet and you don't reward them for it. They pecking at it doesn't get them any food. So you train them on, say, 2 or 3 Picassos and 2 or 3 Monets, and then you show them 50 Picassos they've never seen before and 50 Monets they've never seen before. And if they only peck at the Picassos, that shows that they're recognizing that it is by the same painter. So anyway, they can tell the difference between a Picasso and Monet painting. If you think, well, those don't look that similar, how about these? Here you've got Van Gogh versus Chagall. And they could tell a Chagall from a Van Gogh painting, even when it was shown in black and white, even when it was blurry, and even when it was only partial, not the whole picture. So, you know, I mean, that's kind of an artistic abstract concept, if you will. Well, it shouldn't surprise you that if birds that are very auditory, very vocal animals can do it visually, they can also do it with sound. And so this is again Watanabe. Watanabe trained them on Bach, and they could tell Bach's music from Schoenberg's music. Again, you may not think that's so different, but so similar, but still. And without any training at all, once he had done that, they generalized to tell Vivaldi from Elliott Carter. And they didn't even need any training. I mean, just one trial where they were given food for Vivaldi. That was it. That was all they needed. And lastly, just because it's cute, he also wanted to show that birds could be art critics. And so he trained them to distinguish between good children's paintings and bad children's paintings. And again, they had no trouble doing that. So I think that's pretty clear that birds can understand abstract concepts. There are thousands of examples I could give you, but I like that one. Okay, memory. Many birds, we know birds, some birds have excellent memories. In the wild, for example, Clark's nutcrackers, which of course we have here in Washington State. Clark's nutcrackers live up in the mountains, and the way they survive the winters there is they cache food all summer. They hide food. They hide up to 33,000 food items in a given summer. And they remember where most of them are. And what's really remarkable about this is they make very few errors. They very rarely go to a place where there isn't food. And even though when they hid the food, there was no snow, they can find the food even if there's 7 or 8 inches of snow on the ground. So, they don't even have the visual cues of the landscape the same. This is very advantageous to Clark's nutcrackers because it means they can stay in the mountains all year. They don't have to migrate. And so they can get a very early start on breeding. They are not the only bird to do this. Is that next or? Well, okay, I'll hold that thought. Here's another bird that has a really good memory, even though it's got a tiny little brain. And of course, this is an Anna's hummingbird. Anna's hummingbirds have brains the size of a grain of rice, which shows you don't need a lot of physical brain in order to have a good memory. You may not know this about hummingbirds, but hummingbirds remember which flowers they visited and how long ago they visited them, and they behave differently with different species of flowers. So for example, this flower here, if you suck all the nectar out of it, may take 30 minutes before the nectar refills. Well, they will wait 30 minutes before they go back to that flower. Whereas another type of flower may take an hour to refill. So they'll wait an hour before they go back to that kind of flower. And again, they very rarely make errors. They're very efficient. And so, that shows they've got really good memories for what they have just done. There have been a lot of lab studies. Besides, if you're the kind of person who believes you have to see it in the lab, not just in the wild to believe it. Here's a California scrub jay. What these researchers did is they gave them all these little plots of land that they could cache food in, because scrub jays cache food too. And they had 2 different types of food they could cache. They could cache, this is just one of many trays. They could either cache seeds or they could cache worms, all right? So they go around and they hide worms, or they hide, actually, I think it was peanuts and worms. And, okay, they had 2 different groups of birds. There was the replenished condition and the perishable condition. In the replenished condition, the researchers periodically every night went and replaced all the food so it was always fresh. And in those conditions, the birds went back only to get worms, because worms are better food than peanuts, okay? But if they didn't replenish the food in the perishable condition, after 5 days, what they would do is the first 4 days, they would go and get all the worms. And then after that, they'd only go get peanuts because they remembered how long ago they had buried the worms and knew they wouldn't be good anymore. So that's really nice, very elegant proof by Clayton and Dixon. So excellent memories. I wanted to show you this. This came out literally this week, a new study about bird memory looking at black-capped chickadees. I haven't had time to really study it thoroughly yet. It just came out this week. But what these researchers did is look at the brain itself to see how they could have such amazing memories. And the answer is they laid down little barcodes, in effect, barcodes of neural activity in their brain. So that's something I'm looking forward to learning more about. I told you that recognizing yourself is another characteristic of intelligence that very, very, very few mammals have. But birds do. Some birds do. Here you go.
Humans aren't the only ones aware of their own reflection. Birds can recognize themselves as well. Researchers have shown this for the first time by placing different colored dots on magpies' necks. The birds could only catch a glimpse of the stickers if they looked in the mirror. Here you can see a bird scratch its neck when it notices a brightly colored sticker. Some magpies tried to remove the sticker with their beaks while others used their feet. Birds that were tagged with black spots that blended in with their feathers didn't react when they looked in the mirror. Magpies have bigger brains than other birds that allow for lots of connections between different brain areas. Researchers think this may explain why they can recognize themselves while other bird species may not be able to.
Okay. Very, very, very few animals, only some apes and humans can recognize themselves in the mirror. And I think someone once showed it in elephants, but it's not a common trait at all. Vis-a-vis problem solving. Boy, we could talk about this forever. Whoops. I already showed you one film of problem solving.
Playfulness and
No. Why did you skip back to that? Okay. I don't know why this is all messed up. I'm sorry. Let me just give you one example of problem solving that I like. I used to live in New Zealand, so I like New Zealand birds. That's why I like kiwis so much. But there's a little bird called New Zealand robin. It's kind of blurry, so it's hard for you to see it. It's right there. It's the same size and shape as a European robin, which is why they gave it the name, though it's mostly black. Anyway, they can count. And the way scientists figured this out, they know the difference between 1 and 2, is because they took these sticks and they hollowed out holes in the stick, and then they covered the hole with a cover. And the birds, because these are birds that cache food, would cache 1 or 2, because that's all that would fit, worms inside these holes, okay? And then later on, what the scientists would do when the bird wasn't around is in some of the holes where there were 2 worms, they would take 1 out. So there was only 1 in there. And when the birds came back to retrieve the food, they were fine if there was only 1 in there, if they had only put 1 in there. But if there were supposed to be 2 and there was only 1, then the birds got very upset and would poke around and flit around and keep trying. So they obviously could distinguish the number 1 and the number 2. And again, that's something that really very few mammals can do. So indicative of intelligence. And I'm just skipping stuff because I've kind of run out of time. I'm not going to show you. There's my friends, the Kias again. I have to tell you, because again, I lived in New Zealand, Kias are birds that if you live in New Zealand, you either love or you hate, because they're so smart that they make your life very difficult if you're a backpacker like I was, because they love to take rubber, windshield wipers, the rubber around the trunk that keeps the water out, because they use it to make their nests. And you kind of get into this tug of war game with them where you come up with new ways of tying tarps onto your car so that they can't get at the rubber. And it only works for so long, and then you have to try a new way because they figure out how to get there. But anyway, they can use probability information. If I were to show you this video, which is too long, especially because I can't skip to where I want to be, what you'd see is, 1, Kias learn individuals' preferences. So they may know that I like the color black and you like the color blue, and they'll treat us differently. But if you give them a reward for picking, say, a blue stone rather than a black stone, and they can go to different containers, and one container is mostly blue, the other's mostly black, they always go to the one that it's more probable that they're going to get the item that rewards them than the other. So you can find this, it's a nature clip. It's really, really lovely. So let me just close by talking about which birds are the smartest. What are the smartest birds? Well, even though they're really not at all closely related, they're about as far apart as birds can get. Corvids are very intelligent and parrots are very, very intelligent. Why these two birds? Well, they're slow maturing. It takes longer for them to mature and leave the nest than most other birds, so there's a lot of opportunity for learning. They're social. They tend to live in large groups. They also live in very changing, variable environments. And so they're generalists and omnivores. You know, they don't just catch the same mosquito over and over again. They exploit lots and lots of different foodstuffs. Parrots are so smart. That's a gray parrot, that they can learn more than 200 words and respond to them. So these are the smartest birds. They have the largest brains of any birds, and really are as impressive. I mean, I used to work with monkeys and chimps, monkeys and apes. They are, in many ways, they can do tasks that many monkeys cannot do. But I just needed to finish by talking about, is being smart good? Because I've kind of made it sound like being smart is necessarily good. And the answer is sometimes. I mean, it's yes and no. Being smart, as I said, lets birds live in habitats that they otherwise couldn't live in. It lets them solve problems that come their way. But it's not always true, speaking as an old evolutionary biologist, that being smart is such a great thing. Sometimes dumber animals are more successful than smarter animals. And my favorite example of that is when you look out the window, you're going to see chipmunks, you're going to see squirrels running around in the trees, you're going to see rabbits hopping around. If we went back 50 million years, you'd be seeing monkeys doing all those things. Once rats and lagomorphs, rabbits, evolved, even though they're not nearly as smart as monkeys, they outcompeted them, because sometimes breeding really fast is a more adaptive trait than being intelligent. Being intelligent is the trait that we have, but it's not necessarily the best. Anyway, I hope I've convinced you that you should be very careful who you call a bird brain, because you may not be saying what you think you're saying. And with that, I'm done. Thank you.